If you've driven, walked, or biked across the Burrard Street Bridge lately, you've probably noticed three massive new towers rising beside it. That's Senakw. And what you're looking at right now is only the beginning. When the entire development is eventually completed, the plan calls for roughly 6,000 rental homes across 11 towers built on just over 10 acres of land. In this video, I'm going to show you what's already been built, what's still coming on the other side of the bridge, why this development is so different for almost everything else being built in Vancouver, and what adding thousands of new homes could mean for this entire part of the city. But there's one number you want to keep in mind as we go through this: parking. Because if we're potentially adding thousands of residents to this tiny piece of land, you might assume we're adding thousands of parking spaces. We're not. I'll show you what they're doing instead. But to understand Senakw, you really have to understand what this land represents. Long before there was a Burrard Street Bridge, or even a city of Vancouver, there was a Squamish village here called Senakw. In the early 1900s, Squamish people were forcibly removed from the village and their homes were destroyed. After a decades-long legal battle, approximately 10.5 acres of land were returned to the Squamish Nation in 2003. So when you see these towers going up, this isn't simply another Vancouver developer buying a piece of property and putting up condos. For the Squamish Nation, this represents a return to ancestral land more than a century after their people were removed from it. So what is actually being built? Well, the scale is pretty remarkable. Senakw is ultimately planned to contain roughly 6,000 purpose-built rental homes, including more than 1,200 affordable homes, along with retail, public spaces, and community amenities. And here's the crazy part. All of this is being built on approximately 10.5 acres of land. To put that into perspective, they're essentially creating an entire vertical neighborhood on a relatively small piece of land tucked underneath and around the Burrard Street Bridge. Now, let's talk about what you can actually see here today. On the west side of Burrard Bridge is Phase 1. These are the three towers that have completely changed the view when you approach the bridge from Kitsilano. Together, Phase 1 contains 1,409 rental homes. The first tower received its occupancy permit in 2026 and contains 333 homes, marking the beginning of residents returning to Senakw. And these buildings aren't exclusively tiny studios. The development is offering everything from studios all the way up to 4-bedroom rental homes. There are also extensive amenities planned throughout the community, including a pool, fitness facilities, co-working areas, rooftop spaces, gathering areas, and substantial bicycle facilities. But here's what's easy to miss when you stand here looking at these three towers. This isn't Senakw. This is just Phase 1. Now, let's look over to the other side of the bridge. The master plan ultimately calls for 11 residential towers across the entire Senakw community. Phase 2 uses a very different architectural style and concept from these first three towers. Phase 1 buildings are known as the Mountain Towers, with their shapes drawing inspiration from Coast Salish design and their rooftops pointing north towards the mountains. The Phase 2 buildings on the other side of the bridge are referred to as the Long Towers, inspired by traditional longhouses. And beyond that are Phases 3 and 4. So over the coming years, this area around the Burrard Bridge is going to look dramatically different from what you're seeing today. So why did Vancouver allow this much density? And this is where Senakw becomes particularly interesting from a real estate perspective. This is Squamish Nation reserve land. That means Senakw did not go through Vancouver's conventional rezoning process in the same way a normal development would. The Squamish Nation has jurisdiction over the development of its reserve land, while the City of Vancouver negotiated agreements dealing with services and infrastructure. That's one reason you can have this incredibly dense collection of towers immediately beside predominantly low-rise neighborhood like Kitts Point. It's an urban planning contrast that's almost impossible to miss. You've also probably heard the number $1.4 billion that's associated with Senakw. In 2022, the federal government announced approximately $1.4 billion in financing through CMHC for the first phase of this project. But there's an important distinction here. That was financing alone, not simply $1.4 billion handed to the developer. And not every home at Senakw is subsidized housing. There are different housing streams, including rent-assisted homes for Squamish Nation members, below-market affordable rentals, and regular market rental homes. So, where are all the cars going? Which brings us back to that parking question, because the transportation strategy here might be almost as ambitious as the building themselves. Senakw is being designed around the idea that a large percentage of residents won't need a car. Across the completed development, parking is planned at only about 10% ratio. Think about that. Potentially 6,000 homes and roughly one parking space for every 10 homes. Instead, the development is investing heavily in cycling, walking, and public transportation. There's a dedicated bicycle ramp connecting directly to the Burrard Bridge, secure bicycle storage, repair facilities, and improvements to surrounding pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. There's also a future transit hub planned around the Burrard Bridge. Whether Vancouver's transportation system can comfortably absorb that many additional residents is something we're going to find out as Senakw fills up. So what does this mean for Kitsilano? And this is the part I'll be watching closely as a realtor. Of course, I live here, so I'm very curious. What happens when you inject thousands of brand new rental homes and thousands of new residents into one of Vancouver's most established neighborhoods? Older rental buildings in Kitsilano and Fairview suddenly have a huge amount of modern rental competition nearby. But those residents also become customers for West 4th Avenue, Granville Island, restaurants, coffee shops, and local businesses. We could see more retail and services develop around the site. Transportation infrastructure will change. And the entire area around the south end of Burrard Bridge could gradually become much more active and urban. So whether that ultimately makes this part of Kitsilano more or less desirable is something I think we're going to be debating for years. But whatever your opinion is about the density, the architecture, or the impact on the surrounding neighborhood, it's difficult to argue that Senakw isn't significant. A Squamish village once stood on this land. Its residents were forcibly removed. The Squamish Nation fought to regain part of that land. And now they're building one of the largest Indigenous-led housing developments in Canada on it. So the three towers you see beside Burrard Bridge today aren't the end of the story. They're really just the beginning. And over the next several years, one of the most recognizable entrances into downtown Vancouver is going to look completely different. If you want more videos exploring how developments like Senakw are changing Vancouver neighborhoods and what those changes could mean if you're buying, selling, or living here, make sure to subscribe and follow along. Thanks for watching.